Hey everyone, get ready. It's that time of year again. The 2023 Atlantic Basin hurricane season is officially upon us. Now you might think it only runs until November, which is true, but let me tell you, Mother Nature doesn't always stick to the calendar. We've already had a taste of it this year, even before the official start. Back in early May, the Hurricane Center dropped a bombshell.
The National Hurricane Center announced that the first storm of the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season actually formed in mid-January. It was a low-pressure area off the northeastern United States coast that should have been designated as a subtropical storm.
But hang on tight, folks, because the real action is yet to come. The most active part of the hurricane season is still a couple months away. You know, when things get really intense, August, September, October, that's when the storms really kick into high gear, so we need to be prepared. So, in today's episode, we're going to do a little bit of time travel. We'll take a trip back to 2017 and talk to a Florida Keys resident about the unforgettable day Hurricane Irma made landfall. We'll hear her firsthand account and get an update 6 years post-storm. But that's not all. We've got a special guest lined up. I'm sitting down with a new leader at the National Hurricane Center to get an inside scoop on what we can expect for the season. And of course, we'll be diving into the future of hurricane communication and forecasting because staying informed and safe is always top priority. I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie, and you're listening to Off the Radar, a production of the National Weather Desk. On the show, we dig deep into topics about weather, climate, the ocean, space, and much more. Our goal is to help you better understand the weather and to love it as much as we do. We're starting today with Michelle Lincoln. Michelle has lived in the Florida Keys for 2 decades, and she also happens to be the Monroe County Commissioner. And at the time Irma made landfall in the Lower Keys in 2017, she was the vice mayor of Marathon. Now, if you don't remember, Irma impacted Cuba as a Category 5 hurricane before heading toward Florida.
A new update and new forecast track on Hurricane Irma as it is now closing in on the Florida Keys. Winds at 130 miles per hour for the Keys. The National Weather Service telling people if you're riding out the storm in the Keys, now is the time to take shelter.
On the morning of September 10th, Irma made landfall near Marathon as a Category 4 hurricane. Listen to my chat with Michelle about her memories of that week. All right, so let's go back to 2017, Hurricane Irma. It was in September. This was seen coming kind of a long ways away. It formed off the coast of Africa. It was making its way across the Atlantic. Can you take me through the timeline of what you were looking at, what you were expecting in the Florida Keys as far as impact and the days leading up to it?
Yes. So we're so fortunate, if you can use that word, compared to a county or a town that gets a tornado where you have zero warning. You know, when we hit hurricane season, we know we're in it. Everyone's just a little bit more vigilant about looking at the weather charts and looking at anything that might be looming out there. And you are correct. We saw it coming off the coast of Africa. We saw it coming off in the quadrant that makes everybody nervous here in Florida, in the Florida Keys, because it's down low. It's going to impact us. And I think where the Florida Keys sit, because we're hanging out there, we have to look at storms that come from the Atlantic as well as the Gulf. And we're usually in that cone of uncertainty. Normally, when we're in the cone early on, we kind of start to breathe a sigh of relief because as it gets closer, we usually get pushed one way or the other. And sometimes we're fortunate and we get pushed out of it. That was not the case with this one. And as it came closer and closer, when it was a week out and we started holding our emergency operations center meetings, you could feel in the meeting the sense of dread and the sense of doom that this one was definitely going to impact Monroe County. It was definitely going to impact the Florida Keys, and it definitely was going to do so in a large way.
Okay, so then the storm happens. Can you tell me what you saw?
Complete devastation. It could still almost make me cry when I think about it because I felt as though I was in a war zone where I did not recognize my own street. I drove by it without even knowing that was my turn because so much had been destroyed. All the landmarks that I was used to were gone. The gas station front was gone. The trees were gone. And everything had been covered in muck, in the ocean, in the wind tearing down the trees. And the stench was horrible, and it was the smell of decay. It was the smell of sewage. It was the smell of whatever the ocean spit at us, combined with homes where people hadn't cleaned out their refrigerator. So now everything was rotting in their homes. If you ask anyone who lived here if they can recall the smell, they'll say yes, absolutely. And if they could recall that feeling of depression and sadness and sorrow over how destroyed our community was. I mean, it was powerful.
Was it still kind of a war zone at that point? Did you have to help people physically, emotionally, mentally?
All the above. Yes, we were still completely in the war zone. We all did work as one large family, helping each other in doing the dig outs and the cutting through of streets and searching to make sure everyone was safe, and then who needed what, and coming up with those lists, and then being able to get that word out, because again, we didn't have cell service for several days. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have water. My daughter and her husband, they have a ground level house, and they got about 5 feet of water in their home, and they lost, all of their yearbooks, their scrapbooks, their baby albums, their stuff, as we like to call it. And, it was tough helping them clear out their home, but telling them that, hey, you can create new memories. And this was just physical possessions. Your life is so much more important than your belongings.
So looking forward, were there any lessons learned, any changes that you're going to make for this upcoming hurricane season, given what you went through 5 years ago?
Absolutely, the importance of early preparation. I see now, especially as storms are happening earlier than they normally do. So I understand now how important it is to have that ditch bag ready, to already know where all of my hurricane insurance information, where my important documents and paperwork are located. We've rebuilt stronger than we were before, and we're more resilient now than we were before. So we just have to be diligent in watching whatever is going on in the tropics and make wise and safe decisions and follow the advice of the Emergency Operations Center.
In the past 6 years since Hurricane Irma, hurricane forecasting has made leaps and bounds, and there's a good reason for that. It's the National Hurricane Center. They're the ones responsible for those maps we often see with that famous cone that's pointing toward a coastline. And you won't believe the amount of time and energy they pour into perfecting that cone. It's actually been the subject of intense debate over the years. Well, the Hurricane Center recently got a fresh new leader on board. Dr. Michael Brennan stepped in as director this year, filling the shoes left vacant by Ken Graham, who moved on to become the director of the National Weather Service last year. I got the chance to chat with Dr. Brennan about his life and career as a tropical forecaster, and we also dove into his goals for the future of hurricane communication. It's a conversation you don't want to miss, and you'll get a sneak peek of what the Hurricane Center is working on this season and over the next few years.
First, I want to get a little bit of background on you, NC State through and through, right? Can you give me a little bit of history here on your career and where you've been so far?
Yeah, so I've been at the Hurricane Center for about 15 years. I came there in 2008 as a hurricane specialist, so I worked in that role for about 8 or 9 years. So doing forecasts, day-to-day hurricane forecasts, doing some applied research, some other technical development tools, that type of thing. Got to forecast some pretty memorable storms like Sandy, Irene, coming in through the early parts of the 2010s. I was acting branch chief of the Hurricane Specialist Unit starting in 2017 for Irma, Maria, Harvey. and then took over the job permanently in 2018. And it's been a pretty busy stretch since, with storms like Michael going back all the way up through last year with Ian, and became the director back in April. So it's been an interesting few years. Prior to that, I was the science officer at the Weather Prediction Center for about a year and a half, which has a huge, large-scale responsibility of forecasting all sorts of weather across the United States, from being the backup of the Hurricane Center to winter weather and snow to heavy rainfall, medium range forecasting, all of that.
Anything in particular from your youth that kicked off a love of not only weather but tropical weather?
I mean, I think like most meteorologists, I had a pretty big interest in weather almost as long as I can remember from an early age. I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, kind of a mid-latitude place, pretty 4 distinct seasons, lots of interesting weather, winter weather, severe weather, remnants of hurricanes, things like that. So, sort of was exposed to a lot of different kinds of weather as a kid.
All right, so we've been in a kind of lull here for a while where there hasn't been an official director of the Hurricane Center. So I want to talk about your role there. What kind of big decisions do you make as the director of the Hurricane Center?
Well, it's a higher level type position. It's not as involved in the day to day, making the forecast like I used to be. But, it's sort of setting the overall, vision and goals of the center, where we want to go in the next, 5 years. What do we want to do in terms of improved products and services? But there's a huge communication aspect to it too. The public awareness and training and, conferences that we're doing now, the Hurricane Awareness Tour we just did last week. Again, just kind of making people aware every year, hey, hurricane season's coming. It's also sort of being the lead voice for preparedness and information when a storm is threatening. We're working with the media, we're working with emergency managers, government officials. We have a huge international responsibility that I have a role in as chair of the World Meteorological Organization Region 4 Hurricane Committee. And we work with, more than 20 different countries across the Caribbean, Central America, Bermuda, Canada, that all are affected and all are within our area of responsibility. So it's a really interesting job. It's multifaceted. There's really never any downtime. Yeah. So
you're talking about the next 5 years and vision. I know it's only been a month. Do you have a vision yet? Is there any sort of plan in place for what the next 5 years might look like?
Well, I think, there's sort of two pieces I think of. We're always working on the physical science side. We're always trying to make the forecast better. We're always trying to improve our understanding of how hurricanes work, getting more data to the forecasters, better models, better information. So we want to really improve the forecast of the hazards. That's what we're really trying to move towards. The water hazard, storm surge, rainfall, flooding are what kill the most people. We want to improve the hazard products we have that are probabilistically based. We want to make them more actionable. We want to push them out to longer lead times. We want to ensure that they have more real-time uncertainty information and incorporated into them, which they don't really now. They usually are based on our climatological error distributions. How many, what are our typical errors for track and intensity forecast over the past few years, rather than being more representative of the situational forecast uncertainty. So that's an area we need to move in. The other part is just the communications part. We have to continue to be innovative and push into new communication spaces, social media, live streams, reaching out, because people are getting information from such a wide variety of places now, and the information landscape is evolving rapidly. We really have to be nimble and be able to respond and be in those spaces so that we can, make sure that our voice is getting out there amidst all the other information that people consume.
But going back to the hazards, you mentioned storm surge. I heard there's a new update to the storm surge model. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Weather Service's probabilistic storm surge model called P-Surge just had an upgrade go in, and there's a couple of different pieces to that. One is it's going to allow us to issue real-time storm surge forecast information out as much as 72 hours in advance of the arrival of the storm. So we're pushing that out to longer lead times because people are making evacuation decisions and other preparedness decisions involving storm surge even well beyond 3 days. But now we're pushing that out to 3 days. The other piece is that it allows us to run P-Surge for 2 storms at once. So if we had a situation where we had a storm affecting, say, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and another storm affecting the Gulf Coast, or a Gulf Coast and East Coast storm simultaneously, we'd be able to run the real-time storm surge modeling for both storms at the same time.
And then kind of pairing that with the communication aspect of things, do you think that the public generally understands when they see the storm surge forecast what that actually means?
Well, I think, I think it depends. I mean, some people are pretty familiar with storm surge. If they live in a very storm surge prone area, they may, understand what it is. I think one of the challenges, though, is when you talk about these very extreme storm surge events like we had in Ian last year, where we're talking about 10 to 15 feet of inundation. I think it's hard for some people to understand what that means. Like as physical scientists, we understand, what that's going to do to a community, not just the inundation itself, but the devastating wave action on top of it. So it's a challenge for us to help people visualize and understand, 10 to 15 feet could be a really abstract term or abstract concept to people. We're working with the social science community to help, create visuals that show, okay, here's what a city landmark might look like with 10 feet of inundation or 15 feet of inundation, so that you can help people visualize what those impacts are going to be. I mean, the other thing we have to really focus on, again, and this product hasn't been around for too many years, but the storm surge warning has been around since 2017. And it's really sort of the most dire warning that we can issue. It means that you're at risk of life-threatening inundation from surge, which is the potential leading killer of people in tropical storms and hurricanes in this country. It has the potential to kill the most people on a given day, as we saw in Ian last year. So we really want people to pay attention to that storm surge warning. If you're in an area under the storm surge warning, that means your life is in jeopardy. And that if you're asked to leave your home, you really need to do so.
And then more of the communication side of things, there's been a lot of new directors among NOAA. I feel like in the past year, every single one of them has told me that communication is definitely a big push of theirs, and specifically inclusive communication. So I'm curious how the Hurricane Center can warn everybody and be inclusive. Are there any goals there?
Yeah, we're working towards, offering products in multiple languages. A huge part of our area of responsibility is primarily Spanish speaking, especially internationally, but there's a huge Spanish speaking population in the United States as well. We have some limited products right now that are available in Spanish, but we're looking to expand that in the future and potentially expand it to other languages as well, so that people can at least get the information and consume it in the language that's their primary language, which will help them understand that. Part of it is designing products, graphics, words, choosing colors, involving the social science community so that we create products that people can actually understand. As physical scientists, we for a long time created products that we liked because we understood how they looked, or there might have been technical limitations as to how we could design them. Now we're involving more of the social science community. We're doing focus groups, talking to users, understanding, okay, well, you need to use these words and these colors and this kind of depiction of the information so that people can actually, consume and understand it. I think the other part is, again, we need to be in spaces where people are. We know people consume information on lots of different devices. There's huge generational differences in how people get information, from television to social media to your phone to the computer. Again, we have to be able to be in all those spaces and make sure that our voice is out there. And we need to reach underserved communities, historically underserved communities, and make sure that we're going and doing outreach and education in that area, in those areas in the United States and also internationally. We just undertook a Caribbean hurricane awareness tour where we stopped in multiple countries. We also stopped in Puerto Rico. We just did the hurricane awareness tour along the Gulf Coast. We went to Jackson, Mississippi, New Orleans, Tallahassee, Houston area, and trying to get out into communities and make sure that we're accessible and that people can come and understand our products and hurricane hazards.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up a good point there. There's like kind of the obvious marginalized communities, but then there's also, like the colorblind community. And so it's interesting to think about all the different people that need to be served. Okay, well, the last kind of point I want to hit is talking about this season. Everybody always asks, they ask me as a meteorologist, what does this season look like? What does the season look like? And I like to stay very vague. And the Hurricane Center doesn't put out an official forecast for the season, correct? But is there anything you can tell me about expectations for this season, especially given kind of the change here from La Nina to El Nino?
Well, I mean, my short answer is that we're going to have hurricanes. We don't know where they're going to go. We don't know how many they're going to be, but that the risk is there and people have to prepare for the season regardless. Now, of course, everybody knows El Nino appears to be coming on in the Pacific, and all things being equal, that does tend to, limit tropical storm and hurricane activity in the Atlantic Basin to some degree. But there are other factors. We know the Atlantic Basin sea surface temperatures are quite warm right now, which would argue for more favorable conditions for storms. So, I don't want people to get too hung up on the seasonal forecast. There's uncertainty associated with that. NOAA puts out its forecast in May, but then it updates it again in August as we get towards the peak of the season. Most of the activity happens August, September, October. We can have quiet stretches during otherwise impactful hurricane seasons. You go back to 2022, everybody started to wonder in August. It was really quiet. It was like, are we going to have any storms? And then we had lots of hurricanes in September. We had a hurricane landfall in the United States in November. So as a reminder that the season is 5 months long, the risk is pretty much there the entire season. And again, even if it's an otherwise quiet season, there can still be impactful storms. There can still be major hurricane landfalls, heavy rainfall events, which are almost entirely unrelated to how strong a storm is. It doesn't take, even in an overall unfavorable environment, there can still be periods of time and locations where conditions are favorable and storms can form in those small windows of opportunity. So.
Cool. Well, Mike, Brennan, congratulations on your new role. Good luck with everything. And let's hope for a very quiet season.
We could hope. Thanks, Emily.
A quiet season would be fantastic. Off the Radar is a production of the National Weather Desk. Make sure you're following the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes come out every Tuesday. If you have a weather nerd in your life or someone you know that just likes hurricanes and wants to learn more about them, please share this episode with them. Also, please rate us, review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Let us know what you think of the show, and you can suggest ideas for future episodes. This podcast is produced, hosted, and edited by me. Special thanks to Richard Cook, Jay Mishkin, and the rest of the National Weather Desk team. I'm meteorologist Emily Gracie. Make it a great day.